Hello lovelies, and welcome to today's video. My name's Alya and I'm so glad you stopped by. Today is about how the eye sees. I'm going to be taking you through the journey of looking at an object or a light, for example, and following it through the different structures of the eye, all the way back to the way it goes in the brain. And I find this sort of 101 on vision extremely fascinating because all the other things then stem from the basic understanding of how this system works. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. I hope it's informative and you enjoy the look as well. I think it's turned out really well. And you stick around for the rest of the video. Today's topic is a little bit exciting because it just kind of brings everything back to basics a little bit. So we can really talk about kind of the journey that the ray of light takes from the very beginning to the very end of the eye. So just even now as I look at the light in front of me, the first thing that the light will hit is the cornea. Now, the cornea, and I've spoken about it in different videos, every single part that I'll be talking about today I've probably covered in a different video at some stage. So if you want to learn more about the individual parts, I would highly encourage you looking through the catalogue, and maybe I'll even link some things in the video as well, so that you can have a look if you're more interested in particular parts of the anatomy. So the cornea, it's a clear kind of contact lens dome that sits in front of the eye. It's covered in the tear film above it, and behind it in the anterior chamber that's full of different fluids. Then right behind that is your iris with a nice round aperture in the middle that we know to be the pupil. So in through it flows past all the muscles and things like that then hold the lens. It goes through the lens. Now it does bend at the cornea. The cornea is very refractive and does bend the light. Then it bends again when it hits the lens. And if it's a close-up object and we're looking at a young eye, that lens is quite flexed and it does bend the light a lot. But if the eye is looking at a distant object, it's quite stretched out and relaxed and doesn't bend the light quite as much. All of that then travels through the vitreous humor and then eventually hits the retina. Now, because it's gone through so much refraction, by this point, whatever we're looking at, in my case, a light, is now upside down. And you sort of think, well, if it's upside down, then how come the whole world isn't upside down for us all the time? Well, the reason for that is that because our brain is really the part of the whole system that does the seeing. All that the eye really does is it captures the light. So how does the brain then interpret all these important images, and why are we not just seeing upside down, irregular lights and things like that? What gives us such fantastic detail? Now, the retina is where we really start to form some kind of decent vision. The retina is 10 different extremely thin, extremely intricate and very interconnected layers of basically cells that are mostly neurological in nature. They're little receptor cells and little ganglion cells that to each other or interweb with each other through different cells with funny names like amacrine and all that sort of stuff. Not relevant here, but they talk to each other effectively. They work like a little grapevine of information. And then all of that information then gets very specifically turned 90 degrees and keeps traveling again. 1/4 of the information then travels all the way out the side of the brain, another 1/4 of the information out the other side of the brain, and the other half gets twisted over in the middle. So the left eye's information on the nasal side goes to the right, and the right nasal information goes over to the left. So half of the things your left eye sees ends up on the right brain, and half of the information that your other eye sees gets flipped over to the right brain. So really, really exciting stuff if you think about it. So much intricacy has happened, and we haven't even really passed, the middle of the brain. Now, this is all happening at the part of the optic nerve called the chiasm, the optical chiasm, which sits somewhere around the same area where our pituitary gland sits. Why is that important? That's when we talk about brain disease. Sometimes we have some sort of dysfunction or malformation or issue with the pituitary gland that makes its size or its position change. And occasionally you do get optic chiasm tumors or lesions that will disrupt that messaging. That's why the optic nerve is so important when it comes to brain changes or brain, especially formations like tumors or aneurysms, because we already have mentioned that the optic nerve has covered so much geography and we've only made it to the first half of the brain. Now by this stage we've undergone some turns and some deviations, some splits and some changes. So already the two little balls at the front have interchanged information at the front, have interchanged information right and left, and have traveled quite a distance from the mere little eyeball at the front. Next, you get a continuation of that travel all the way to the back, where everything meets up. At this stage, you are at the occipital lobe, which is all the way above, just above where your neck is, right at the base of the skull. So it's gone all the way through here, crossed or sprawled, come back together into these two little lobes like this at the back. Interesting already, right? Now, at the back there, you've got a separate representation for your central vision to your peripheral vision. You've also got communication between right and left eye, allowing binocular vision to occur. Because as we mentioned, we've got this whole left journey, this whole right journey with a bit of crossover and a bit of twisting and turning. But how come our eyes work as a pair? And that all happens back there at the occipital lobe. So this tiny little light that I'm looking at has already refracted again, flipped, twisted, come over a really long crossed over journey and made it back together again at the occipital lobe, where there are cells waiting to receive that information in a very, very organized fashion, which then becomes the right way up, full of detail, full of color, like the most amazing, billion pixel camera you've ever seen. Forget, 4K or 8K. This is billions of K, which kind of makes no mathematical sense, I realize, but this is a really high quality camera here. The other thing we have to realize is we don't necessarily record everything we see. The brain filters out the noise really, really well. Remember how when we had those analog cameras and you would take a video and there was a screen at the back and it looked like the screen was kind of doing this little flippy thing? That's because cameras will record regularly. Our brain allows our information not to flicker. We take information and we make perfect sense of it. So somewhere along that journey of turning what you're looking at into an image, turning that light that I'm looking at into what I see in front of me, there is a little process which includes perception, which includes information of my environment, which also intercepts with things like hearing and other information through different senses, and then also includes things like what I call personality or psychology, right? And that is including things like, ignoring what I don't need. And that's going to be very specific to the individual. That's already beyond sight. That's already something that's either habit or upbringing or, experience, whatever it is. So I refer to it as perception because it's an easy word to use. It's a familiar word. And that is just basically encompassing all the things like, for example, I'm someone who notices color and detail a lot. It's who I am as a character. Colors are important to me. Details are important to me. Patterns fascinate me. It's something I really notice. You could argue that it could be my visual system that is acutely interested in that, and that's why my personality has hence developed to notice these things. Or we could say the opposite is true, that because I have a personality that's really, really interested in these things, my visual system has developed these particular skills. It can go either way, the chicken or the egg. And I would say that both are probably true to some degree as well. I don't think that somebody that doesn't have an acute visual system, no matter what the personality, is going to be particularly interested. And I don't think that somebody who's disinterested, no matter how good their system is, will bother to notice. There's a girl here on YouTube who is completely blind through retinitis pigmentosa and lost her vision at quite a young age, who is fiercely interested in colors and fashion and all those types of things, even though she can't actually see them. But she can still perceive them, right? She can still feel them, she can still remember them, she can still experience them in her own way. And that's what I was mentioning about the different senses, right? For example, music, right? Or mood. Like I will probably gravitate to certain colors because of the way they make me feel, not necessarily how I see them. I also tend to see colors really, really vividly. I tend to notice shades more than others. And that's just because, again, that's an attention to detail. That's probably more character trait than what it is visual system. What I love most about the visual system or the brain in general is just how many connections you have to pass along the way. The way I imagine it, or the way I sort of think about it in my head when I'm explaining it, especially to a patient, is like a train system, like an underground train system. You can catch a connection to all the different tunnels, or more importantly, different paths and tracks can intersect with one another. But in the case of the brain, you actually do exchange information there as well. It's kind of like the internet, it's like a search engine. That little light is the information you put into Google, for example, and your brain's this big network of information that gets bounced back when you go to experience that light that you're looking at. There's also memory involved. There's also different sort of emotions involved as well. So it's so much more than just the physical senses. There's also a lot of sort of other things that are very individual to take into consideration as well. So, it's really just so very fascinating in that respect. So the next time you go and look at a little light, you'll no longer be just looking at a little light. You'll be thinking about all the different experiences and journeys that tiny little message has to take before it forms what you're actually seeing. But by the time you think about all the little things that it's gone through and become your vision, you've seen it 1,000 times or more. Could be millions of times, depending how quickly and how long you sort of think it over. It's really, really fascinating. Like, we really are, our brains and our systems, they're just a very, very intense supercomputer. Our processing, the way we think about things, is millions of times slower than what we actually experience them. We can use this example of seeing light as a perfect example. By the time we've thought about it and kind of, realized the whole journey that this tiny little light that we're looking at takes in order for us to see that there's a light there, it's already happened so many times. It's so instantaneous. And that's because all those little connections, they've been there for a lot longer than what we've been around. We develop our visual system at the same time as we develop our brain, which makes sense now that we know how well they're connected to each other. And that usually happens at around about 7 weeks of gestation. So mum's just found out she's pregnant and you've already got an eyeball and a brain. It's really, really fabulous. And the rest of the time that you're developing in the womb, or the baby's developing in the womb, those systems are just getting stronger. They're just getting even more intricate, more connected, more precise. And by the time you're born and you actually start seeing things and developing memories and experiences and learning to use those wonderful systems, at that stage, you've already got a system that's ready to learn and absorb. So it's interesting that, we say that kids are like sponges. It's really true, especially true of our sensory systems and that of our visual system, because we really do absorb things pretty much like a sponge when it comes to vision. And that's true of adults and children, but children especially, because everything is so new and so amazing, that kids tend to be more open to that kind of new information. In the first 8 years of our lives, those systems are so plastic. They develop so much that we can actually go in and manipulate them and develop them further. So that's why it's so important to let, especially very young kids, let's say before age 4, really learn and discover and play in a natural way. Give them as much stimulus as you possibly can. Lots of colors, patterns, all the different experiences, because they're going to use that throughout their entire lives. And it's just wonderful to see how basic things like showing a kid a toy that has lots of different patterns and lots of different textures and lots of different brightnesses, shines, surfaces, and that will then eventually develop into comprehension, which will eventually develop into attention in personality, into different character traits. It's just wonderful. And even though we can't necessarily document the direct connection, we can definitely observe that kids that have a lot of sensory play then develop emotional quotients, develop intellectual quotients, become better at observation, become better at comprehension, and so forth and so on. All right, my lovelies, I hope you found today's look and talk interesting. I hope that you guys are doing well out there. The world is definitely going through some stuff still this day. I hope you hit the like button as well. If you really enjoyed this video, definitely subscribe. There's plenty more like it on the channel and plenty more to come. Head over to Instagram for more things about my world, about Ida's creations. There's definitely more going on over there. And wherever you are around the world, lovelies, I hope you're having an amazing day and you really are keeping well. And I can't wait to see you on the next one. Bye.
together.